you so much, Lauren.
Thank you.
I don't listen to podcasts because they are lame,
Wow.
but
They are.
I will listen to an audio essay. I will listen to an audio
Thank you,
essay.
thank you. It sounds way more refined. And you can, if you don't wanna listen, you can read them.
Yeah.
And because the code is so good, if you don't wanna listen to the whole thing, you can just play line by line. Yeah,
Yeah, you thought of everything.
I
What
really
a-
did.
What a good design.
thank you.
Good, thoughtful design work. So if, you're the last one of the day and I'm already like thinking of the connections to,
Yeah.
other talks, but I want to start maybe, in Detroit and the Detroitness of it. And because unlike other talks, like yours one is so
Yeah,
grounded in a specific, time and place. And, your choice to practice there, to do this, what it means to do this design history practice there. Allows you to do also the constraints of the city and also like the ways in which the history of the city, both like the history of incarceration in the city, and everything you said about, the white flight to, the, racial capitalism is very strong there. But also the way that the city mythologizes its own history.
Yeah.
And you have to start working into that narrative as well. But yeah, say more about doing this in Detroit or doing like a site
Doing it in
specific
Detroit.
kind of.
yeah. I think, what does it mean to do it in Detroit? I don't think I could have done it anywhere else, maybe. I think, so contextually, I think it's important to note that like Detroit wasn't the beginning of my sort of political radicalization, but it is a place I chose to move to because I was becoming more and more aware and more engaged, living in Los Angeles and not finding the political homes that I wanted there. And so I explicitly moved to Detroit because I wanted to be able to study with people like the Boggs Center, or Feed 'em Freedom, which is a place where I farm. That said, Detroit is also, like you said, this like bastion of American economy that failed, but it's celebrated and celebrates itself so much for that history. So there are threads even in the conversations that became part of the podcast, I mean, audio essays. that where we're talking, for example, about Black capitalism and like what it means to be like challenging displacement. There's a story I tell over a series of episodes about a park across the street from my house that was bulldozed by the city because it was like resident run and it was ugly and they didn't like it, and what it means for Black people to be doing that to each other. And so I think it's a lot of it, a long way of saying it, like I think a lot of it I couldn't tell the narrative in the way that I tried to anywhere but Detroit. And so I owe a lot to Detroit for that. And I also owe a lot to Detroit for my own politicization and study. And many of the voices you'll hear, because these were recorded conversations, are not me. It's like, it's lifelong Detroit organizers, farmers, whoever. They're the ones articulating it. I'm just like the narrator, like piecing together the arguments that they've made and the things that they've lived. And then the last thing I'll say is there's this Grace Lee Boggs, who was a Chinese American historian and theorist who lived in Detroit, and the Boggs Center is a center for leadership and political studies that's named after her, and her husband, James Boggs. Grace has said that she feels sorry for people who don't get to live in Detroit because they don't get to see these reminders of what happens when giants fall, meaning corporate collapse. And so like, I think a lot of people look at Detroit and they're like, oh, it's so sad, all the ruins, which is like, yeah, it really does. I mean, truly, I think the architectural ruin of Detroit does sort of like take a toll on people in a particular way. But I think it is also like a very embodied is the wrong word, but like a reminder that you live every day by walking around or driving around, because nobody walks around Detroit. Driving around and seeing the ruins of whichever factory, you can never forget how fucked capitalism is living in Detroit. And I think she frames it as a blessing, and I feel similarly, even though I think, you know, it could be interpreted more tragically by someone.
No, I agree. I did, I enjoyed, 6 years in Detroit, and I came out of it feeling like you, like, I can't say I'm a Detroiter, because that's
Don't
like
say
something,
that.
it's something that's really, you
People
have to
will come
really
for
earn
you.
it. But I do feel like that when I had people visit, it's like, oh, I just walked, this is so empty, it's so bad, like, fuck you, man.
Yeah.
People live here,
I
you know.
would go
This is
so
like,
hard
you
for
just don't know how to live in the city. You just
Yeah.
don't know how to read, like,
Yeah.
and like that kind of thing where it's like, you're missing so much of what goes on here. And like and that energy that is such a powerful gravity, that people find ways of living there that you can't dream about, in other places. So when I saw your show, the object that stood at the making room and, you go down that dark stairwell.
I didn't know you were there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, it was, yeah, I mean,
I mean, we didn't know each other then.
pandemic, and I had a baby. I mean, like, I was inside.
You came to a Red Bull? Wow.
And I took a bus. Yeah. Cause I, like in the city.
That means so much.
But that,
I took a bus and
took 2 buses, cause there's no, they're gonna make it hard on you, take the, anyway, the newspaper, the Detroit Free Press newspaper,
Yeah.
which I wanna link to the Dewey, Beats, Freeman, like, that was an unintentional, quasi hallucination, a mistake of, byproduct of technological change. Yours is an intentional kind of like,
hallucination,
yeah. So I remember reading that and being like, that kind of like uncanniness of being in the space you created, where it's like, I felt like I know this is fake, but also felt like that relief of being, well, imagine if, I mean, the headline was, see Detroit gets $300 million to do whatever they want.
Right.
Like, imagine that. Like, I mean, what would happen? Like, it's like, and then I realized then like how much is being denied to us, despite like people like Detroit sports. In fact, there's so much money in that city, just coursing
where it
through
is?
it,
The police
coursing through
department.
it. And all the investment and like, or like in the Caesar Arena, or like, there's so much wealth. It's just the people who live there don't get a say of how that's used. So like making an object like that, which was in some ways like this distinct artifact. What was it like? Tell me about like the choices of, the headline. I mean, you made a complete kind of.
Yeah, there's a whole front page. Can I talk about different artifacts?
Yeah,
actually, the
please,
choices?
please.
Sorry, I know you had,
No.
okay. So, because I think for me, it was instructive. So there was another artifact I made, which was a summons for a restorative justice panel in the style of a summons for jury duty, which everyone hates. And some junk mail that went along with the summons that indicated that if you didn't want to serve on the panel, it had like an older woman who was just like, oh, I don't want to, like her photo, she was like really tired. She was like, I don't want to do this. And had very sort of like, shitty ad, like the penny saver ad style type and it just said like, don't want to do a panel, hire a surrogate. So there was this, I was having a conversation between artifacts where there was the summons for a person in the home and the junk mail that indicates that it's a service no one wants to perform. And if you don't want to, you can just pay someone. So there was an intention in the rooms not to build a perfect vision, but and I didn't explain that in the space itself, there were 3 different time scales. And so this was in the middle time scale. The first was now, and the last one was so far. I didn't put a time on it because I didn't know when it would. And so in this one, I was trying to have a conversation between artifacts about the fallout, right? So like, if we moved to, say we shifted to a system of conflict resolution that is predicated on restorative justice, but there's these hangovers of like capitalist attempts to evade public service. And I did workshops with Detroiters before the show where I brought the artifacts to different groups of people, and it was interesting because many people saw the summons and they were like, oh my God, that's so amazing. I would love to have that process in place because like we need more restorative justice in the world. And then restorative justice practitioners were like, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever heard of. Don't let this happen. This means that the state has co-opted this practice. This means it's now coercive because you are being forced by the state to appear. And it's just not doing what they want it to do. And so I made the choice. So there was like the design choices of like copying a summons, which wasn't that hard. And then there was the choice to keep an undesirable potential future scenario in the room to sort of just like allow for that provocation to shape the ways people had a conversation about the show, or not about the show, but like about the possibility of this future. And so that's it. That was one of the big ones like that, where I was like, I know it's not ideal, but it's pretty probable. Because like body cams, that was a pretty radical idea. Now they just use them to record themselves killing people. So, you know, I think it's important still to think through the sort of fallout of progressive solutions being co-opted and how we might respond, and in order to sort of project in a way that can help us think differently about organizing strategy, for example. I don't know if it can do that yet, but that's the line of thinking that I'm hoping for.
Questions from the audience?
While you were talking during your presentation, I kept thinking about the ways maybe in which we as designers display creativity with imagination or imaginings. And I was thinking a lot about, like, you walked us through this process, which in a way also seems like a practice, sort of this thinking, you know, speculatively. So I guess my question is, have we as designers lost some of our ability to imagine? Because we're sort of taken with the idea of create, like this design is a creative pursuit, as opposed to, for lack of better language, like radical imagination, or where that imaginings can lead us.
I don't want to speak on a whole profession, but I do feel at times. I really hate designers. I'm like, I think that, yes, I do think there's a bit of a, one might call it crisis of imagination. I think though that it's not unique. Maybe I think what's unique to designers is that is this like particular orientation to capital that makes it, that just like sucks the imagination out of you, because in order to survive, you're like, yes, I will design this Project 2025 report. Whoever did it, like, who did that? Jesus. You know?
There, in an essay, 2019, Design and Culture, Design, Race, Neoliberalism, and I assign it to students, and they always start being really excited about reading it, and at the end, like, wait a second, how do we, it seems like you've said, I mean, the argument is, and this is like, why I love teaching that essay, it's like, I often feel that way as well, it's like, is she saying we just can't be designers anymore without participating and reproducing racial capitalism? It's like,
Sorry, I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, I'm not like, there's contradictions abound in capital, you know, I have a job that pays me money that comes from philanthropies, which only exists because rich people made some tax code loopholes in the 50s. Like, so I think that there's no purity that I'm after. I'm just like I don't know. I feel that it's necessary to like call attention to them so that we aren't just like plodding through thinking we're doing something
but,
like designing projects.
But that wasn't my takeaway from your talk right now.
No,
it's more about you know, very hopeful, like designers have a unique ability to intervene in the collective reproduction of social imagination, right?
I think,
Part of like where my question was going, like, you're showing us that you have the ability to like do these things and work in these ways and think in these ways. And I understand you can't speak for the whole profession, but it's like, when I think about what design education is right now,
Yeah.
like that's miles ahead of where we are.
I mean, I will, so like, I'm in this new, I quit my job at U of M, and now I'm in a new role, with a nonprofit that does movement support work. And it's because I was doing this stuff, and I freelanced with them. It's called Liberation in a Generation, or LibGen, which is way easier to say, for like 4 years, and so I also used to work in policy. I didn't explain my whole career arc. It doesn't make sense, but this is where I am now. So I used to work in policy, and so because I know these people, they asked me a long time ago if I could help them think about creative ways to get better input on policy proposals for guarantees, like guaranteed housing, guaranteed income, guaranteed debt-free college, things like that. And so I designed these speculative sessions where we make artifacts from a world where those policies exist, and then there's a facilitation around that to have these like generative discussions that then feed back into their policy design. And so I think if anything, I'm really interested in designers like hybridizing the ways we apply design a little bit. Like I've been in a lot of workplaces, for example, where, you know, you write the policy report and then the designer comes in to like design the format, and it's like, okay. And I used to get in trouble at my first policy job because the designer just could never do what I needed. Like we were trying to do stuff with data around housing. And so I would get in trouble because I would go home and like get into, I didn't even have designs. I think I was in like Ages or something. And I would like make some shit and then bring it back, and they'd be like, oh yeah, this is good. And then the designers are like, eventually went to school for it. But, you know, I think that, I don't know, sometimes it's like not, I don't think this is like a prescription for all designers, but I do want us to like take an interest in something more than form. And like, I don't know, I think a lot about how everybody, you know, 2020, everyone's like, oh, I want to do something with my design skills for the movement. I'll make a poster. And I was just like, Jesus Christ. Like, go talk to your neighbors. Like, be a human, and then maybe someone will ask you to design something. I promise you, at some point, somebody in an organized group is gonna ask you to design something. So like, just like, I think that's often been my plea, is to maybe like hybridize our humanity, but just like by having interest in knowing our neighbors. And like, I struggle, I don't want to say activism because I think these words get like sort of hyped up into things that they're not meant to be, but I'm really just talking about like knowing people and relating people and having different kinds of engagements that help us understand what design can be. Because I didn't come, like, I did go to a strange experimental graduate design program that introduced me to speculative design, but I did not think coming out of it that I was like gonna go be a speculative designer. Like that was never a career desire of mine. I was just like, I hate racism and cops, and you know.
It seems like what you're talking about is coming back to the imaginaries thing, though, because
Sure.
like, I mean, what strikes me that's so different about your work compared to other sort of speculative futuring kind of projects by designers is that it's about what would need to be destroyed. It's not just about creating this cool society that can exist.
Yeah.
It actually is engaged in what would have to go by the wayside, what could not be anymore.
Yeah.
And that to me that's way bigger than the question about thinking about designing a poster or something. It's like a whole thing about how people even understand. I'm doing more of a comment than a question.
That's fine. I feel like it's only
Sorry, guys.
Wait a.
Move on to the next thing. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all.